I want to talk about the R6 Mark III. Let's get into it. What's up, you guys? This is Devin with CFX Studios TV, back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about the R6 Mark III. Now, the R6 Mark III is slated to come out soon with the R7 Mark II. Pretty soon, within like a month or two, they should be announced. We're pretty much assuming, but the R6 Mark II came out a little bit later than the R6 Mark I. The R6 Mark I came out along the lines of the R5. They pretty much came out at the same time, and I think Canon did this because Canon wanted to make sure that they were able to put out a camera alongside the R5 because they were so far behind in the mirrorless world. Sony had already had their first batch of cameras out, and Sony was just slinging cameras at the wall. The R6 is along the lines of the 6D in the DSLR days. It's not as expensive as the R5 or the 5D of its time. It's about $1,000 cheaper, and it goes along with Canon's ranking system. You have the numbers, the 1 is the top, and then everything else is below that. So you have the R5, which is usually somewhere around the secondary camera, but now it's like the third tier camera because they introduced the R3 not too long ago. Now, with all that said, the R6 comes right under the R5, about $1,000 cheaper. So how much can we expect the R6 Mark III to cost? I would say somewhere around $2,400 to $2,700. Originally, I said $2,500 to $2,900, maybe even $3,000, but I don't want to say that. The R6 has always had that kind of cushion between the R5 of about $1,000. And if the R5 Mark II came out at about $4,200, I don't want to say it's $3,200, but it's going to be a little bit more than the R6 Mark II's cost. Now, the R6 Mark II is one of the most popular. The R6 line, the line of cameras, is pretty much one of Canon's most purchased full-frame camera out there. Nobody's really buying the R1, the R3. A lot of people love the R5 but can't afford it, so they end up going to the R6. Now, what are some of the things that we think are gonna be in this camera? Now, I've always watched Ordinary Filmmaker. He's doing an amazing job of staying in the pocket of all the rumor mills, getting out the videos as fast as he can. So thank you, Ordinary Filmmaker. Really appreciate that. But I'm going to kind of piggyback on some of the things that he got from Craig Blair. Craig Blair is his source for a lot of these specs. But some of the things that we expected to go up on is megapixels. Now, 20 megapixels on the R6 Mark I was something, but it wasn't much more than we expected. As a matter of fact, it was a little bit less than we expected, with the R5 having a whopping 45 megapixels, going from 45 to 20 and being released around the same time. It was kind of like, at least we got something from Canon. But Canon has been rocking with this 20 megapixel sensor since the 1D days, the 1DX days. The 1DX had a 18 megapixel sensor, and that thing is almost 10 years old, maybe even older than that. You had the 1DX Mark II and the 1DX Mark III. These cameras didn't have much more than 24 megapixels. So coming out with the R6 Mark I with 20 megapixels, it really caused a bit of a stir. A lot of people wanted a little bit more megapixels for their money because Sony was killing the game with at least 24 megapixel cameras. Then they came out with the A7R series with even more than 30 megapixels. Canon doesn't really give you a lot of megapixels for the amount of money that you pay nowadays. They're more so focused on burst rate, having 20, 30, maybe even 40 plus frames per second. They now have finally improved the pre-burst, so hopefully this R6 Mark III will also have a good pre-burst. But going back to the megapixels, I think we should see at least 33 megapixels. Why? Because 8K is somewhere around 30 megapixels. And if you want to downsample and have a higher quality 4K, much like the R5 Mark I and the R5 Mark II, you can do that with 33 megapixels at least, or a little bit more. You can take those megapixels and make a sharper 4K image. As a matter of fact, even the R6 Mark II had 6K when you had an external monitor. Now, with that said, we're probably expecting 6K to be recorded internally in this camera since you were able to record it externally with the previous version of this camera. So having over 30 megapixels really works. I'm not quite sure what 6K is. It might be around that 40 megapixel mark. Maybe even 45 megapixels would be good. Something to compete with the R5 that's now really getting long in the tooth. But the only other camera that would come out or is out right now that is competing at that price point that has some really good video specs and some comparable specs is the R5C. And that's very interesting. The R6 Mark III and the R5C. The R5C is one of the best Canon cameras ever made, in my opinion, one of the best hybrid cameras ever made, even to this day. A lot of the Canon similar cameras don't have the amazing specs that the R5C has. Now, with that being said, we're looking at over 30 megapixels. I'm 100% sure this is going to happen. Now, they're going to improve the readout speed, of course. They have to, because readout speed wasn't really an issue that we had with DSLRs. But now all these electronic shutters and these fast shutter speeds, we're able to see things in your image that we weren't able to see before because the camera's reading the image at a certain speed. And the camera is using that same digital technology to stop the image. But when we do that, we can see a whole bunch of different things. If we don't have incremental shutter speeds like Sony introduced, and maybe a different even shutter, so to speak. I don't think they're gonna put in this camera because a different shutter would cost a lot more money, especially since they don't have a lot of technology catered around a different shutter like the A9. The A9 came out at a much higher price, even though it came out, what, 3, maybe even 4 years ago, I think. I'm just guessing, don't quote me on that. But with that new technology, I doubt they're gonna put it in a lower priced body. I would think that they would start off with that and maybe an R3 or introduce an R2 or an R4. Another line of camera that people aren't thinking about that can actually suffice the price of utilizing new technology like a global shutter or something like that that can compete with the A9. Now, they said the readout speed was supposed to be around 6.3 to 2.7 milliseconds. I would think that would be awesome. I think that's around the R3's timing, and the R3 doesn't have a lot of issues with rolling shutter, doing sports and doing fast action with balls that look weird or with fast hummingbird wings. I don't think we're gonna have an issue with that. The rolling shutter is really good in the R5, and I think this is around the same amount of speed. There's supposed to be a new LCD 5-axis rotating screen. I have yet to see Canon have this technology. I'm really curious as to see what Canon is supposed to be doing with this. I think the A1 might have something like this on the Sony side. So I'm really interested to see if they're going to introduce something new that doesn't cost that much, like an LCD screen. I don't think an LCD screen that is new is going to cost as much as a global shutter in a camera. So if they're going to introduce something new, it would be perfect to introduce this during the R6 Mark III, because the R6 Mark III doesn't cost that much to make, but the LCD screen also doesn't cost that much, probably, to introduce. It might, I don't think it will, but it's definitely something that we 100% know that Canon is probably going to try to compete on later down the line. Now, here's some of the things that I want to think about as far as what I am expecting it to have. One thing that I really hate on the R6 Mark II is the fact that it does not have a mode dial lock. We have a mode dial lock on the 70D, the 80D, the 90D, I'm pretty sure. And I think we have a mode dial lock on the 5D Mark IV. All these are older DSLRs, which we implemented this technology in those cameras because we knew that having two camera bodies, especially if you bump them together or having anything that can bump against your body like the camera itself, if you have it on a strap, it will change the modes. You will go to aperture priority, bulb mode, shutter priority, and a lot of other modes that you didn't think about going into, and you just pick up the camera when you're in a fast-paced situation, you're at a wedding or anything like that, and you're doing these things and you're trying to figure out exactly what you need. You have a moment's notice to get that camera up to your face and photograph if it's not already up to your face. And then you're fiddling with all these dials. Most pro photographers don't take the camera away from their face. So if they accidentally bump this mode dial, it could be the difference between having the picture that you want and having a whole bunch of messed up pictures just because you didn't notice it was not. Not that you don't know what's happening, but you just didn't know it happened. So I felt like Canon put the cripple hammer on their mode dial locks, and it was like, oh, we're just gonna have a new mode dial lock, or a mode dial, but not put a lock on there because we're just introducing something and we want to save money. I don't know. They have a lock button, but the lock button is not as good as a mode dial lock, because anytime you have some physical dials that you can't customize and they may not apply to the lock button, you need to make sure you have a mode dial lock. So Canon really dropped the ball on that one. I love the R5 Mark I, and this is definitely a controversial opinion, but I love the fact that you have to press the mode button and then hit the info button to switch between video operating systems and the photo operating systems of the camera. Because no matter what you do, you will never be able to knock it back and forth. Then on the other side of that, the same thing with all the modes. Aperture priority, shutter priority, program, bulb, customs, whatever you want to go into, you have to hit that mode button first before you get into them, and you see it in bright color. something that we never had on the cameras before. I think we might have had it on the EOS R, but nobody wanted that camera, so we're not gonna talk about that one. So a mode dial lock is extremely important. Something so simple, but I think a mode dial lock and a new screen will really help this camera out. And these are small, cheap things that Canon can do and not have to recreate the wheel or make it cost extremely a lot more money than the R6 Mark II did when it came out. The R6 Mark II did not have any compression level video codes in it at all. So you're sitting there with HD, full HD, all of them compressed. You have 4K, all of it's compressed. The only time you can go uncompressed in this camera at all, because everything's either IPB or IPB compressed, which is okay, but I really wanted something that you could do. And I really appreciate C-Log 3, but to get any more latitude out of your videos, you had to plug up, use that HDMI, mini, micro, small HDMI port and use a Ninja and then get 6K RAW. It is a big leap to go from compressed 4K to 6K RAW. And then you need an extra monitor, you need the battery, you need to make sure you unlock ProRes RAW from Atomos if you're using Atomos, because that's the most used monitor. And then you had to do a whole bunch of other stuff to figure out exactly how to use ProRes RAW, especially if you have Premiere Pro. Don't get me started. ProRes RAW 6K on Premiere Pro, I promise your computer will blow up. Not necessarily because the ProRes RAW is bad, it's just that Apple doesn't really like sharing their codecs with any kind of Windows-based programs. I think Adobe has really been Windows-based since their infancy. So they're not really trying to share well, with Apple ProRes because it's Apple's codec. Now, ProRes would probably work good on Final Cut, but for those of us who are used to using a program, we really don't want to change. And I'm not even sure you can use ProRes RAW on DaVinci Resolve, which is a free program at that, but it's probably going to take you actually updating to a paid version, which kind of takes all the sting out of DaVinci Resolve because you get it for free. So there's that. And we really do, like I said before, need more megapixels in this camera. One of the biggest claims to fame for the R5 is the megapixels. And I know people say megapixels don't matter. Everything is good in low light. You don't have to worry about it. But a lot of times when you may not be able to afford all these new RF lenses and you're shooting video. A lot of times I can go into crop mode with my R5 Mark I if I don't have a lens that reaches far enough. I don't have 100 to 300, 10K amount of dollars lens on me just to get a fast zoom lens. All these fast zoom lenses, anything with an f4, especially these f4 primes, you're looking at thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to be able to use these things. And Canon doesn't seem to be making too many. They are making cheaper variations, but it's hard to make a cheap, fast telephoto lens that goes over 300 millimeters. It just won't happen like that. You might be stuck with those 100 to 400 f5.6 to f8. Who has an f8 lens at all? It's just like at 400 millimeters, I'm at f8. I might as well just stop at that point. But at the grand scheme of things, we need more megapixels for your video. So 45 wouldn't be half bad. We already have 2 Canon cameras with 45 megapixels. Let's up the ante. Maybe it might encroach on the R5 Mark II sales, but the R6 and the R5 Mark I came out at the same time. And then the R6 was probably the more purchased one. So I don't know. Maybe they might want to compete on this R6. Maybe they might want to compete on this R6 Mark III to make sure that more people purchase the lower end bodies, because that's where most of their market share is coming from. Most people don't buy R1s, R3s, and even though it's extremely popular and a lot more people buy the R5 variations, they probably don't buy as much as they do for the R6. So they probably want to throw the kitchen sink at this Canon. What do you guys think? Do you think they're going to up their megapixels? You think they're going to update the readout speed? You think they're going to fix this LCD screen issue? You think the price is going to be the same, or they're going to jack it up? Let me know in your thoughts in the description below. Support the channel and stay tuned for the next video.